This is the beginning of part 2 of our module Managing Interest Rate Exposure, which teaches you how to use simple interest rate swaps and options to manage interest rate exposures arising in the ordinary course of business. We remind you that this part 2 contains chapters 3 and 4 of the module, with chapter 3 describing strategies that center around the use of option combinations, including collars and seagulls, to reduce the cost of protection, and chapter 4 progressing to participator forwards and leverage strategies, in each case including their advantages and drawbacks. This chapter 3 describes and analyzes strategies centering around the use of option combinations, including collars and seagulls, to reduce the cost of protection by assuming certain risks the investor is comfortable with. We begin with a strategy involving the simultaneous purchase of a 5-year LIBOR cap, let's say struck at 7.5% this time, and the sale of a 5-year LIBOR floor struck at 5%, for example, to reduce the net upfront premium. This combination of purchasing a cap and selling a floor for the same notional amount is referred to as a collar strategy, turning red in the title of this slide right now, and is among the most common strategies used by companies and investors to hedge interest rate risks with options, along with its sister strategy, purchasing a floor and selling a cap, depending on the direction of the underlying exposure and specifically whether the user is a borrower or an investor. It may seem strange initially to hear that a company seeking to hedge an exposure would consider selling or shorting an option rather than buying one. But you will understand in just a moment the precise logic of this approach. Note first that the company would spend $823,000 to purchase the 7.5% cap, but would earn $636,000 selling the 5% floor, resulting in a net upfront premium paid by the company of some $187,000, appearing now at the top of the slide, or just below 19 basis points up front. This comes to some 4.33 basis points annually, using the methodology illustrated once again on worksheet annualized premium in the third example in the worksheet. The table appearing now, in which we have rounded the annual premium to 4 basis points, summarizes the 3 distinct outcomes under this strategy. You should click pause for a minute while you make sure you fully understand its contents. This strategy, unlike the ones we saw previously involving the purchase only of caps, establishes a lower limit in the bottom left cell of 6.04% for the net interest payment, in return for lowering the cost of protection for the company if LIBOR should rise above 7.5%, enabling a lower maximum annualized interest expense in the bottom right cell of the table. In a sense, the company is foregoing the possibility of a highly favorable outcome under the unhedged loan when rates fall significantly to reduce the cost of insuring against an ugly one. These various outcomes are now plotted on the graph appearing here in red on this worksheet color, with the diagonal as before showing the unhedged position and the blue horizontal showing the hedge with the IRS. Companies interested in colors often seek the proverbial best of all possible worlds and strive to eliminate the upfront premium of option-based strategies to create what is known as a zero premium color. Returning to our original upward sloping LIBOR curve on worksheet grid, we can see that there is an infinite number of combinations of 5-year caps and floors that would eliminate the upfront premium. But one that is relatively easy to remember is the sale of a 5-year LIBOR floor would strike 5% for a premium, as you can see, of 64 basis points, and the simultaneous purchase of a 5-year LIBOR cap with strike somewhere below 8%, as you can see here. The correct strike for this cap that brings its premium to exactly 64 basis points turns out to be 7.86%, which you can verify very simply by typing in this cell M105 7.86. Hit OK, and here, as you can see, is the confirmation. This leaves the company owing LIBOR plus 1% under the loan, long a 5-year LIBOR cap with strike 7.86%, and short a 5-year LIBOR floor with strike 5%. The different outcomes that are possible on each settlement date are summarized in this table. Revealing once again an upper and lower limit, turning red, on the net interest expense under the loan and the related hedges. But this time, and unlike some of the previous strategies, no net upfront premium to pay. These outcomes are again plotted on the graph appearing here in the dashed blue pattern, while the diagonal shows the unhedged position and the horizontal shows the hedge under the IRS. We mentioned just a little while ago that an infinite number of capped floor combinations can be created for a zero net upfront premium. And this is done simply by lifting the strike of the floor by any amount, which makes it more expensive, while also lowering the strike of the cap by some corresponding amount, which makes it also more expensive, thereby continuing to offset the two against one another to the extent necessary for the net premium to remain zero. Or vice versa, of course, by reducing the strike of the floor while increasing the strike of the cap. Note that if we increase the strike of the floor and reduce the strike of the cap, our upper bound and our lower bound come increasingly close to one another. And eventually, if we continue bringing them closer together, they converge into a single horizontal line, which you should be able to confirm lies somewhere around 6% before the credit spread, and more exactly at 5.90%. At this point, the long cap short floor combination is, it should become obvious, a synthetic IRS. And the point illustrates perfectly the put-call parity principle mentioned, with which you ought to be increasingly familiar from other modules. Moving now beyond simple color strategies, consider what would happen if we altered the strikes under the collar a little and also added a third option on top of the two we already have, in an attempt once again to eliminate any upfront premium. An infinity of alternatives exists, of course, but we will limit ourselves to two particular ones described next. Under the first alternative, the borrower achieves a net upfront premium of 0, as you can confirm in your own time from worksheet grid, by combining a long 7.86% cap, the principal instrument that protects him, with two short options, specifically short a 4.7% floor and short a 9.05% cap. In each case on 3-month LIBOR, of course, and for a 5-year maturity. The two short positions are in essence financing the premium for the option that the borrower is really after, namely the long 7.86% cap. But they expose the borrower to risks we will analyze in just a moment. The borrower's summarized position and related outcomes now read as shown here. Note please that we show all amounts in this table as cash outflows, so that inflows, for example, under the long cap are preceded with the minus sign. This permits us simply to add all items in a column to reach the net interest expense indicated at the bottom of that column. These outcomes are plotted now on worksheet Seagull 1 appearing in front of you, with the graph for our present structure appearing here in blue, while the faint diagonal shows the unhedged position, and of course the horizontal, the swap-based solution. The present combination is referred to as a seagull on account of its similarity of appearance to that seafaring bird. Note that under this particular combination of puts and calls, the seagull's wings are flapping upward. This structure has eliminated the borrower's upfront premium entirely and provides, under a large percentage of circumstances, the benefit of a maximum annual interest cost of 8.86%, except in the somewhat remote circumstance that 3-month LIBOR, currently at 5%, comes to exceed 9.05% over the next 5 years. And even then, the end result for the borrower becomes a net interest expense of LIBOR minus 19 basis points. Not exactly disastrous for someone who normally borrows at LIBOR plus 1%. The drawback, of course, is that this LIBOR minus 19 basis points may still represent a substantial cost disadvantage versus certain competitors. For example, those who simply entered a 5-year plain vanilla swap paying fixed at 5.9%, so achieving an all-in funding rate inclusive of the 1% credit spread of 6.9%. We turn now to the second alternative. The borrower here again achieves a net upfront premium of 0 that you can verify on worksheet grid, this time by combining a long floor at 3.7% with a short floor at 4.7% and a long cap at 8.81%, all of course on 3-month LIBOR, notionals of $100 million, and having a 5-year maturity as before. In essence, the short floor at 4.7% pays for the 2 long options, which are the main instruments the borrower is after. The borrower's summarized position and related outcomes can now be amended one more time to read as shown here. These outcomes are plotted on worksheet Seagull 2, appearing now in front of you, with the graph for the present structure appearing here in yellow against, once again, the unhedged position and the swap-based hedge. Again, the new graph reveals a seagull shape, but this time flapping its wings downward, i.e. in the opposite direction from the previous illustration. So what attracts the borrower to this alternative seagull structure? Again, his upfront premium has been eliminated entirely, and this alternative provides the benefit of a maximum interest expense guarantee of 9.81% to be specific. And while the structure initially appears to place a floor under his interest expense at 5.7%, the borrower in fact benefits from additional reductions in his interest expense if LIBOR falls below 3.7%. The drawback, of course, is that from 4.7% down to 3.7%, the borrower does not share in any of the decline in the LIBOR rate, so that when LIBOR drops below 4.7%, the borrower's interest expense begins to exceed that of an unhedged competitor, but never by more than 100 basis points annually, as we can see from the table. The other principal weakness of this strategy is the more remote protection level of the long cap, struck at 8.81% here versus 7.86% under Seagull 1. In summary, the borrower who opts for this Seagull 2 solution finds attractive the fact that if he is wrong about LIBOR and it declines instead of increasing, his maximum competitive disadvantage versus unhedged competitors is capped at the difference between the strikes of the two floors, or 100 basis points in total in this particular example. In contrast to his unhedged competitors, however, he is assured a respectable maximum on his annual interest expense, no matter how high LIBOR rises in a scenario of severe Fed tightening. The reasonableness of this trade-off, as ever, is the borrower's to evaluate. Worksheet comparison shows the two Seagull graphs directly on top of one another to enable a comparison of outcomes that may be easier for some listeners. Note in particular Seagull 2's outperformance of Seagull 1 on the left. Their perfectly matched positions for much of the middle area of the graph, and finally on the right, Seagull 1's outperformance of Seagull 2. This brings to an end our discussion of collar and Seagull structures, and with it the whole of this chapter 3. But a question in the quiz will call your attention to some interesting features of the price sensitivities of Seagull combinations.